Hello and welcome to the second part of our Enigma-3d tutorial. Enigma-3d is a rendering engine which I wrote in Rust and which is capable of displaying 3D objects in an application. It is able to package all resources, display real-time shaders, have some event functions and post-processing and user input, UI, whatever. Like, it is already on a good path to becoming a 3D engine. It isn't like a game engine, but it isn't yet. It's still missing some critical features like audio, for example, like skeletal animations, which are currently in development, but slowly progressing. But for static meshes and for meshes which are like shader driven in types of in case of animation, we should be fine. Let's see where we left off last time. So this one I added later. I can actually show you now here. This is what we did build last time. We have a window, we have a title of the window, we do have a custom skybox, which is not the default Enigma skybox. We have a camera controller, which allows us to move the camera with WASD. With control right click, we can rotate the camera by moving the mouse. We have some post-processing in place, like in this case, you see the bloom and also some lens dirt. We have spawned a 3D object which we can select. We have PBR rendering, we have a texture in our material. And next, this was last time. And next is to actually bring some interaction into that scene, custom interaction on top of what we have here with our default in its initialization. So this session, we want to implement an update function, an event function, and we do want to have a little UI displaying some information. So the very first thing is we're going to build an update function. So let's make a new section here, implement update function. And you don't need to do everything in one function. You can actually inject multiple functions, but we are now just doing it in one. Let's hide those resources. Say update function. And this is just a normal function. Hopping selection. And what this does is it takes an upstate as an input, but a mutable reference of it. So when we inject the function into Enigma-3d, into the update loop, we expect it to have this upstate as an argument, and this will allow Enigma to properly execute that function in an update loop. So we can now, since we have access to the upstate, first get the time from it, because we want to have a hopping object. So in this case, we need to actually see like the current time. And since we want to move that into our context, we need to clone it. And then we say for object in upstate.get selected objects mutable or mute. Now we have like a list of selected objects in the scene only when they are selected, and we loop through them. So what we now can do is we can say, okay, we want to move that object. That transform. So we go into the transform of the object, and then we give it a directional array to move it into this array. So let's create that array. The first argument is just 0, because we just want to move it up and down. For the second one, we say we use our time. And this is why we needed to clone it, because we're moving it here into the context. And we multiply this by, let's say, 3 to have a faster hopping object, right? And we take the sign of this, and since we just want to hop it a very little bit, we say, okay, this is actually just hopping 0.001, 0.005 maybe. Oh, and we're missing obviously the third component of the array, which will be the C component. So now this is actually our very, very simple hopping selected objects function. We can now inject that here into our app state, inject update function. And here we say, okay, what do we want to do with the object here? We want to inject it as an arc, new, and this, you see, it takes the function with a mutable reference of an app state, which we just created. So we can inject that hopping selection function. Let's now play. So we do have our scene, like everything before. But now, as soon as we click and select that object, you see it hovering. If we deselect it again, it stops. Yeah, this is what we now did. Let's maybe also build an event function or a second update function. We can make a second update function where we say, okay, we want to I don't know, like slide, and we keep it similar. All, but instead of taking the selected objects, we just say get objects mutable. Not object, but objects mutable. Yes. So now this is actually applying to all objects. And we do this here and move it down and actually slide it in the XY all the time and the X-axis all the time. And only up and down when we select it. So this acts on all objects, this only on the selected objects. And for the slide all, we can just inject it as well. Upside.inject update function. Slide all. So now what we will see is, yeah, the object is always moving to the left and to the right slightly, but as soon as we select it, it also moves up and down. Cool. So let's now say, okay, we want to also have an event function. So it's functions, not function anymore. And an event function is built the exact same way, just that this actually happens when we press a button or add something to a delta, right? Event function example. Again, we have our app state. And what do we want to do when we do want our object, not necessarily the selected object, but in this case we want to hard code the object. To show you a little bit more. For this, we can give our object a name. And we now say, okay, we want to get an object, the object directly. So we can say let Suzanne equals appstate dot get object. Okay, we have only by UUID. We don't have it by name. Oh well, here we have get object. Nice. Get object mutable. And there we pass in the name, Suzanne. This is obviously just an option, so it might return none. So we need to match against it. And for now, we just do nothing. But in case we do get the object, I can actually now say, okay, we want to rotate the Suzanne object. So we can say s dot transform dot rotate, not set rotation, but rotate, and that actually requires an array again with a rotation value. So we say, okay, we want to rotate it -5 degrees on the x-axis, 0 degrees on the y-axis, and 0 degrees on the z-axis. With that implies we can now say, okay, we want to inject that event function. Appstate.inject not update function, but event. So the very first thing we want here is an event characteristic, which tells us what actually should be the trigger. And you see we have a mouse down, we have a mouse press, we have a mouse scroll, but we also have a key press in this case. So in our case, we want to have a key press, which takes a virtual key code. And for that, we actually need to have winit as our dependencies. Because we're just using the winit key codes here. So let's copy this here. Okay, the virtual key code here is not found. That might be because we need a specific version of winit here, not just the latest one. Um, this is a little tricky now, but Enigma currently works with the where do I find it? Yeah, 0.28.7. Let's add this real quick and let's run to update the dependencies. Okay, and now we should be able to find that virtual keep code. Yes. And even say, okay, we want to import that directly to have it a little bit shorter in code. Sorry for that. That's actually a good bug to fix for me. But for the next thing we want to inject into this app state is obviously what should happen on this event. So here we put again an arc into it and pass in the not the camera rotate. We have the event function example here. And last but not least, we want to say, okay, if we press E now on the keyboard, should we also need some modifiers? If so, we need to define some event modifiers. And in our case, we don't. So we just say none. So now when we run this, and we press E, we start rotating the object around the x-axis. This is actually not what I wanted. I wanted to rotate it around the y-axis actually. So let's set this here to -5 and this one here to 0. So now you have like 3 different ways. Now if we press E, we rotate the object. Yes. Now you have 3 different ways of getting objects in an event or an update function. You can either use selected objects, you can directly get an object by name, or just get all the objects and loop through them. And you learned how to inject these functions here. So the very last thing we want to do is we want to build a little UI function. Let's do this. For this, again, we need egui as a dependency. So cargo add egui, because we're just using egui as a UI for Enigma. So let's quickly see. We probably also need a specific version for it. Yes, we do need the, where is it? Egui 23. It's actually quite an old one. Okay, and now in our function here and our file main file here, we say, okay, UI functions. So a UI function again is just a normal function, but it also takes a UI context and the app state. So we say function test UI, and you want to have a context. which is a reference of an egui context. And we want to have our app state, like always, it's a mutable reference. So now the very first thing we want to do is we want to create our egui window. And this is normal egui code, more or less. So we give it a title. We say default width being like 200 maybe pixel, dot default height being let's make it just 200. And then we say, okay, we want to actually show the whole thing. And here we pass in our context. And we create a function, internal function here where we pass in a mutable UI reference. And now we add a label here by dot oh yeah, this should be a comma, not a dot. Dot label, and we say okay, press E to rotate Susan, right? These also need to be floats. Yeah, and now we are not using the app state at all at this case, but we could say we want to see the current rotation, right? So we get the current rotation here. Let current rotation equals let's actually say, okay, we just want to display this. So first we get the sun again, similar how we did it up here, right? Oh, let's move all of that down here. Similar how we did it here. We get our Cezanne, we match it. But instead of rotating it, we actually display a label. That label so let's bring equals format. We have a custom thing called smart format, which is an enigma, where we say, okay, we automatically detect one second. We automatically detect like the type, etc., and apply the formatting that way. So we can use that macro here. And in here we say, okay, we want the Cezanne.name, right? So in this case, s.transform dot rotation dot y. Nice. Now we say, okay, here we have our string as a label. So if we have the sun in the scene, we can display its current rotation. Let's inject that event function as well. That UI function, not event, sorry. One second, just getting through my notes. Yep, so inject UI, and in here you say, okay, my UI injection will be appstate.inject GUI this time. And here we just also inject our function as an arc. Which is, do we have it here somewhere? Test UI, here we have it. So why isn't this working? Oh, because obviously I forgot one colon. Stupid me. And now if we run that whole thing, we have our little UI here. If we rotate it, we see how the rotation in the UI changes. And you see it's actually radians. So we probably want this to be degrees. So we don't use the rotation directly. That's a get rotation. Because this will do some conversion for us. And now you see you have proper degrees. Yeah, now we have displayed or shown to you how you can create and inject different types of functions into enigma-3d. You have an input, you have selections, you have UI. You can also inject multiple UIs as again, like so now, same as event functions, right? So we could make a second UI function here and a second event function. So this is really up to you how creative you want to be. But yeah, I hope this helps you getting started with enigma-3d. And I hope you have a little bit of fun. Cheerio.